The Israelis are bombing Damascus not because they care about the Druze community. Hikmat al-Hijri is the proxy by which the Israelis are using in order to justify bombing Syria and potentially later on carving out some sort of autonomous independent area.
We are at the Kuala Lumpur Prophetic Strategy Summit with Sami Hamdi. We look at Israel's bombings of Damascus this last week and ask, will Ahmed Alsharaa succeed in his quest to rebuild a united Syria?
The Israelis are concerned that Ahmed Alsharaa might cement his rule in Syria in a manner that will later threaten the Israelis. The Israelis are proposing a plan to split Syria into four. After Syria is divided into four, we put a minority president in charge of Damascus itself to ensure that Damascus remains a paralyzed central government.
Is it fair, in other words, to blame all of the Muslim rulers for the failure of Gaza?
Syria is what will happen if the Muslim nations continue to prioritize the national interest over the Ummah's interest.
Sami Hamdi, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome back to the Thinking Muslim.
Thank you for having me, Jalal.
Jazakallah khair. Well, we're here at the Kuala Lumpur Prophetic Strategy Summit. Alhamdulillah, I pulled you aside to talk about developments in Syria. There's been a number of tensions over the last few days. Israel has conducted a number of strikes, this time probably more central to Damascus than previously. And it just seems to me that things are moving in a very problematic direction for the new government. Now, all of this centers on Suwaida and centers around the Druze, and in particular, one particular faction of the Druze. I don't know if that's really so relevant, but one particular faction led by Hijri. And I suppose my first question is just bring me up to speed with why things have deteriorated to such a degree that there is now a clear standoff between the Druze community in Suwaida, supported probably by Israel, or certainly supported by Israel, and the central government.
I think that the immediate reason is that there has been a clash between what are referred to as Bedouin tribes and between the Druze community. A truck was ambushed initially, and a few people were killed, and then there was a retaliation, and then another retaliation, another kidnapping, another retaliation. And then eventually the central government in Damascus decided to send in a mediation group. This mediation group was ambushed by forces inside Suwaida, by militias inside Suwaida. And then the central government sent more troops in order to quell the escalation between what they refer to as Bedouin tribes and between the Druze militias. When the central government forces came in to stop the escalation, Hikmat al-Hijri and others around him decided to invite Israel to bomb the central government in Damascus, because Hikmat al-Hijri fears that the government forces that were withdrawn from Suwaida as part of an agreement signed between the people of Suwaida and between between the central government, whereby the central government would sort of say, just stay part of Syria, but we won't keep our troops over there. Hikmat al-Hijri once gave a speech where he said, over my dead body will I allow these takfiris into Suwaida. Ahmed Alsharaa made a concession in which he said, I'm here to keep Syria united. I'm not here to, oppress minorities and the like. I won't keep my forces in Suwaida, but you will recognize the central government. Hikmat al-Hijri called in the Israelis to essentially say to the government in Damascus, we don't want your forces here. That's the immediate reason, the escalation between the Bedouins and between the Druze, and the government trying to mediate, and Hikmat al-Hijri trying to ensure this mediation doesn't lead to the forces staying in Suwaida. The broader reason is that the Israelis are concerned that Ahmed Alsharaa might cement his rule in Syria in a manner that will later threaten the Israelis. And so the Israelis have insisted to the Americans to impose a demilitarized zone in the southern part of Syria, on top of destroying the military installations that belong to Syria, in order to ensure that Ahmed Alsharaa can never be in a position by which he might threaten the Israelis. The Israelis are concerned that the Americans might be leaning towards allowing Ahmed Alsharaa to continue in power on the basis that he'll be a wall against Iran. The Israelis are firm in their view that If Ahmed Alsharaa is going to stay in Damascus, he must have no control over Suwaida, no control over the south, and he must recognize the demilitarized zone. There's a very interesting article came out today on the New Arab, in which, although the Syrian government denies it, in which a Syrian official suggests that they did not expect that Israelis would be unhappy with the forces going in order to calm down that de-escalation, implying there's an agreement that the Syrians have accepted in which, okay, in order to preserve the territorial integrity, we won't keep our troops in Suwaida, but it remains part of Syria. And the Syrian government, according to this report, the indication is that, if we're speaking on behalf of the Syrian government, that we thought if we put our troops in to de-escalate, the Israelis won't react in this way. I think that the Israelis are bombing Damascus not because they care about the Druze community. I think they are bombing Damascus to try to force a confrontation by which Ahmed Alsharaa will make a mistake that will make the Americans come in and carve Syria into the three pieces that the Israelis want. The reports last night, at least from the time of the recording, suggested that a ceasefire had been reached, and that might indicate that the Americans are not entirely on board with what the Israelis want to achieve. But what is clear is that the Druze in Suwaida, it appears that they are in a no man's land whereby they are not entirely willing to accept the new central government in Damascus. And Hikmat al-Hijri's case, he would rather bring a rabid genocidal army to bomb his own people, to bomb his own countrymen, than allow Ahmed Alsharaa, a fellow Syrian, to have any control over Suwaida.
I mean, how much of the actions of Hijri is actually in collusion with the Israeli state in order to achieve his plan of creating a demilitarized zone and maybe fragmenting Syria?
So when Ahmed Alsharaa entered Damascus, the new government that was established essentially reached out to the minorities to calm tensions and to say that we're not here to cause you any concern. What can we do to prove that we're not here to oppress you and the like? And one of the agreements that was made with the leaders in Suwaida was that the government forces would not be present in Suwaida itself. Yeah. They would be able to run their own security, but they would be part of the Syrian state. Ahmed Alsharaa and the government in Damascus managed to secure the agreement of the majority of the leaders of the Druze community. But Hikmat al-Hijri, one of the prominent leaders of the Druze community over there, adamantly rejected the deal that was made with Damascus. And even though he nominally agreed to the proposal that the government forces wouldn't be there, it appears that Hikmat al-Hijri is the proxy by which the Israelis are using in order to justify bombing Syria and potentially later on carving out some sort of autonomous independent area in southern Syria that the Israelis can then use as a launch pad to further antagonize the central government in Damascus. It's always important to remember that when Ahmed Alsharaa entered Damascus, he called a meeting of the 28 different factions that had fought against Bashar al-Assad. One of those factions didn't turn up, and that faction belongs to that southern area where Suwaida is and those areas as well. That faction is considered to be more on the pro-UAE side of things as well. So the concern is that Israel wants to use Hikmat al-Hijri to keep that southern part out of Ahmed Alsharaa's hands. And the concern is that it may not just be the Israelis, it may also be the UAE, who Ahmed Alsharaa has been liaising with on the basis that the UAE might be able to rein in the Israelis who are trying to force that agenda in the south. But it's not a given that the UAE is necessarily against the Israeli agenda there.
So can we talk about Ahmed Alsharaa's strategy so far? When he came to power, of course, Syria was in tatters. You know, civil war had ravaged the country, and he recognized the need for renewal, the need to redevelop this war-torn country. And so he had to buy some space for himself and for his country and for his fledgling government. In order to breathe, in order for his government to survive. as a result of that, he has placated, maybe that's a strong word, but there is a placation, I suppose, of the Israelis, despite Gaza. There's a placation of the Israelis. There's a relationship that has been formed with the Arab governments, and that has given them a direct line into the Trump presidency. Some would say that's a very naive strategy. Some would say that there's a master plan there. I mean, that's, he's bought himself and his people some space. Like, how do you assess Ahmed Alshara's strategy so far?
One of the things that is worth noting is that Ahmed Alsharaa's speech that he gave regarding the events that took place in Suwayda did not mention Israel by name, but rather blamed those who support Bashar al-Assad. And there is a prevalent opinion and view that a lot of the killing that took place of some of the Druze community members in Suwayda that led to the escalation was conducted by Assadists who are trying to spark a confrontation between Ahmed Alsharaa and the Israelis. It's important to remember that Assad and Iran in particular are very frustrated with the idea that they've lost Syria to those who were against the Iranian project in Syria itself. And Ahmed Alsharaa suggested that the Assadist regimes are still trying to cause that sort of instability. The reason why I start with that to answer your question is it's important to remember that when we're talking about Ahmed Alsharaa in Syria, he's not established yet. And what I mean by that is he's taking over a Syria that's been ravaged by Iran and Russia, that's been utterly destroyed by Iran and Russia, where large sections of the community were forced out of their homes by Iranian militias who sought to demographically change large areas of Syria in order to enable a bridge from Tehran all the way to Lebanon, by which they would be able to assert control and hegemony over the region. Ahmed Alsharaa has to deal with the displacement of people caused by Iran and Russia. He has to deal with the fact that Damascus only has 1 hour of electricity a day because of the way in which Iran and Russia squeezed Syria and its resources in exchange for protecting Bashar al-Assad. It's important to note that Syria itself in the northeast, you still have the separatist Kurdish factions that are still debating the extent to which America will abandon their support for them in order to assess whether they should continue making their bid for independence or sign some sort of deal that would enable them to live to fight another day. You have in Tartus and some of the Alawi areas where Iran has a strong presence still that revolted, even though Ahmed Alsharaa issued a pardon for many of those who supported the crimes that were committed by the Iranians in Syria itself. We saw Tartus flare up and many pro-Iran accounts supporting that flare-up, many pro-Assad supporting that flare-up, almost as if to say that if it's not us who are in power, then let Syria burn. I think that Ahmed Alsharaa is also struggling in the sense that Syria remains mired in debt and has no real income that will allow it to rebuild Syria. It's reliant on foreign funding. Turkey doesn't have that money. Turkey continues to struggle with an economic crisis to the extent that it is reconciled now with the UAE in exchange for a $50 billion trade deal. It's reconciled with the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in exchange for money, and essentially it's tried to reorient its foreign policy in a way that doesn't offend the UAE so that it doesn't jeopardize that $50 billion trade deal. So the Turkey doesn't have the money to help to finance the reconstruction of Syria. So Ahmed Alsharaa in this case cannot rely on money coming from the US either. It took a while for the US to lift some of the sanctions on Syria itself, but also Donald Trump is not inclined to spend US taxpayer money to rebuild Syria, given he's been trying to withdraw from Syria for a long time. The EU are unlikely to commit the funds to rebuild Syria either. The French won't do it, the Germans won't do it. Ahmed Alsharaa can't necessarily go to Russia and China for fear that it might provoke sanctions from the US again. And therefore, he's found that his only option is to go to the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and make a promise that he will not allow criticism of Saudi Arabia inside Syria itself. He will not allow anyone to plot against Saudi Arabia inside Syria itself in exchange for some money. And bin Salman is not yet fully inclined to support Ahmed Alsharaa. There was the payment of a symbolic $15 million IMF loan in order to suggest some goodwill towards Syria itself. The Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman lobbied Donald Trump to lift the sanctions on Syria as a gesture of goodwill. Ahmed Alsharaa went to the UAE to also ask for money and to also say to the UAE that let bygones be bygones. I know you guys tried to kill me. I know you're worried about the Arab Spring, but I promise we will not be exporting the Arab Spring. We will not be like the Ikhwan who were in Egypt and in Tunisia. We will not be those who support any instability in the UAE itself. And can you give me a line towards the Israelis so that they might stop bombing the south? I need a peace of 10, 15 years so that I can rebuild Syria. My point is that your question supposes that Ahmed Alsharaa has a range of options at his disposal that he can take. What I'm trying to say is he has no options available to him. There is a famous saying in which it says, people often look at the decision I make, not the choices that I had. And I think that when it comes to Ahmed Alsharaa, the reality is Syria is a cripple. Syria is not in any position to be able to stand on any issue whatsoever. When you think about the fact that Israeli planes were able to fly over Syrian airspace to go and bomb the Iranians, the Syrians had no means to prevent it, had no power to prevent it, had no tools to prevent it, because the tools that were under Bashar al-Assad, the weapons, were destroyed by the Israelis when Ahmed Alsharaa came to power, because the Israelis were satisfied that Bashar al-Assad would never use them against the Israelis, but they're not certain that Ahmed Alsharaa won't use them against the Israelis, and therefore it's important that Assad could be trusted with Suwaida. Ahmed Alsharaa cannot. The Israelis believe that Assad could be trusted with Suwaida. That Ahmed Alsharaa cannot. Assad could be trusted with anti-air missiles and the like. Ahmed Alsharaa cannot. Bashar al-Assad could be trusted to have Syria under his control. Ahmed Alsharaa cannot be trusted to have Syria under his control, because the perspective from the Israelis is that this means of to placate, as you put it, for me I call it to buy time and to appease and the like. In the battle of Khandaq, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam went to Sa'd ibn Ubadah radiallahu anhu from the Ansar and said to him, Ya Sa'd, what do you think if we offer some money to Ghatafan as a tribute to get them to abandon the alliance and go home so we can break this alliance that has gathered all against us? The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam was aware that he was in an existential crisis, that he was literally, all of Arabia had gathered against him, and he did not have the means or the resources to drive them back. So Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, our beloved Prophet, goes to Sa'd ibn Ubadah and says to him, Ya Sa'd, let us buy a peace. Let us placate Ghatafan and buy a peace that will allow us to at least build some strength to prevent this scenario from happening again. Now in the scenario of Khandaq, Sa'd ibn Ubadah responds and says, Ya Rasulullah, if you order us to do it, we'll do it. We'll give the money to Ghatafan. But before you came to Medina, as a tribe, we would never condescend to give Ghatafan anything. It's really beneath us as a tribe. And we would prefer, as Ansar, to dig our heels in and to resist Ghatafan than to give them even a penny. My point here is the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has not suggested something outrageous. And Sa'd ibn Ubadah rejecting it is not doing something outrageous. My point being is that the idea of saying to an enemy that you're not my priority today, that I want to establish a peace today, I want to break an alliance that is crippling my country, is not a bid'ah in the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So if anybody in Ahmed Alsharaa's position, in my opinion, would do exactly what Ahmed Alsharaa is doing. Iran ravaged the area and is still supporting Assadist regimes to undermine my government. That's my priority at the moment. Israel, I don't want to look at you now for the next 10 years. I'm not a threat to you, at least for the next 10, 15 years. Just get out of my country, stop bombing Suwaida. I'm not even interested in retaking the Golan Heights. I don't have the power to get the Golan Heights. I'm trying to get Iran off my back. I'm trying to get these militias to stop conspiring against me. I'm trying to restore the demographics of Syria that Iran changed. And it's not that I agree with Ahmed Alsharaa or disagree with Ahmed Alsharaa. It's that this is the reality of the situation that Syria finds itself in because it's been ravaged so much. And I'll finish on this point. Those who criticize what Ahmed Alsharaa is doing tend not to suggest an alternative or what Ahmed Alsharaa could do. For example, Turkey is supporting Syria today. But if Ahmed Alsharaa takes a position that makes the Americans go hard against Damascus, does anyone really believe that Erdogan will stick his neck out for Ahmed Alsharaa if the Americans come down hard on him? They will abandon him in a heartbeat because sen ben yok, Türkiye var. Like, Turkey interest comes first before Syria's interest comes in. Whether you agree with it or not is a completely different issue. But the point that I'm saying is that Ahmed Alsharaa in the limited... Malaz is here, Sheikh Malaz from One Path Network, who went to Syria. And I assume you've seen him and you've talked to him and the like. Malaz went to areas in Syria that look like Gaza, not too far from Damascus. When he suggested that he wanted to hold some conference or the like, or the like, that maybe people should go to Damascus and try to reorient, he highlighted that one of the reasons it's difficult to do so is the very basic utilities and necessities in Damascus are not available because it's a city that's been ravaged. So I throw the question back at you, Jalal, given you're the ones represented. What is Ahmed Alsharaa supposed to do? And that's why I don't put the blame on Ahmed Alsharaa. I put the blame on those who destroyed Syria for a sectarian agenda. I put the blame on those who sacrificed the unity that transcends sectarianism in order to impose a sectarian agenda that led to this river of blood in Syria, where now you have Israel bombing Suwaida and imposing on Damascus, not only that Golan Heights can't go to Syria, but Suwaida itself is not allowed to go to Syria. And the only thing Ahmed Alsharaa can do is agree to this demilitarized zone when he sent his official to Azerbaijan, and agreed to respect that demilitarized zone just in order to save himself. And it's important to note here, the Israelis want to kill Ahmed Alsharaa. When they're bombing the presidential palace, they didn't miss Ahmed Alsharaa. They wanted to say to Ahmed Alsharaa, we can get you. Damascus is not far. We can kill you. The only reason we're not doing so is because Trump won't allow us to do so. Trump is the reason, not Erdogan. Trump won't allow us to kill you because you're trying to convince him that you're focused on Iran, you're not focused on us. But we're going to convince Trump you're a liar. We're going to convince Trump that the only reason that you're trying to make this peace is you want to destroy us in it. We're going to convince Trump that he shouldn't allow you the 10 years to rebuild Syria, that he shouldn't allow you the 10 years to build an army, he shouldn't allow you the 10 years to build it. My question here is this: why are those arguing against Ahmed Alsharaa sounding more like the Zionists than they do sounding like the Syrians who are asking for some time to rebuild their country?
Right, so this plan really hinges on approval from the Trump administration, or at least the Trump administration needs to maintain a level of support for Ahmed Alsharaa's 10-year objectives or 15-year objectives, as well as the Israelis remaining at bay because the American administration limits their actions in Syria. I mean, how likely is that?
The plan doesn't hinge on Trump supporting Ahmed Alsharaa.
Right.
The plan hinges on Trump withdrawing from Syria on the basis that he doesn't really care about Syria and Ahmed Alsharaa is not a big threat. Ahmed Alsharaa is not seeking American support. Ahmed Alsharaa is seeking what Trump has always indicated that he wants to do, which is to withdraw from Syria entirely.
Right.
Trump withdrew from Afghanistan when all of the US officials revolted against the idea. And he imposed it. And Trump withdrew. And what happened? The Taliban took over. And Trump and Biden, or Trump in particular, finds no reason to get back involved in Afghanistan. In fact, he doesn't even care.
Yeah.
What Ahmed Alsharaa wants is not American support. Ahmed Alsharaa wants Trump to do what he did in Afghanistan. He wants him to leave completely and just leave me to go and build Syria. And Trump is inclined to do so. When Ahmed Alsharaa goes to Donald Trump and says to him, Mr. President, I'm not a threat to America. I'm not going to send people on planes to go and hit the Twin Towers. I just want to rebuild Syria and focus on my own country. I just want to stop the Iranians from brutalizing my country. I'm not even in a position, Mr. President, to threaten the Israelis either. Trump turns around to his officials and said, this guy sounds like a nice guy. The guy fights, the guy, whatever. Maybe we heard a lot of things about the guy, but to be honest, there's nothing here for America to be concerned about. There's no reason for me to stay here. There's no reason for me to spend taxpayer money to send US troops to die for something that I don't see an immediate interest in. If he says he's going to stop Iran from marauding, that keeps the peace in the region. Let the guy do what he wants. I'm going to go back to the White House and try to prevent the Jeffrey Epstein files from being released. Trump is saying, I just don't want to get involved in Syria.
Yeah.
The Israelis are saying, Mr. President, you need to stay in Syria. You need to stay there because you need to make sure that Syria doesn't remain united. And the Israelis are struggling to give a credible argument that is stronger than Ahmed Alsharaa's argument, which is just leave and I'll look after Syria itself. So there's an important distinction here. He's not looking for US support. He's saying lift the sanctions and you can bring American companies to invest. You can even build a Trump Tower for all I care. Just get your troops out so I can establish security over Syria because I want to prevent Iran from establishing new militias in Syria. And Trump, when he hears those things, logically, Trump turns around and says, oh my God, this is really good. It's really awesome. I like what I'm hearing. Trump agrees with the theory.
Yeah.
Biden wouldn't have. Harris wouldn't have. Biden and Harris would have gone with the Zionist project and they would have gone and said, we need to stay in order to support the Kurds. Why are the Kurds, the separatist Kurds, not all Kurds, because these separatist Kurds massacred a lot of Kurds who were against them.
Yeah.
It's like in Bosnia, when we talk about Serb Croats and Bosnians, a lot of Croats supported Bosnia, and Matej Boban, a famous Croat commander, even abandoned a city that had a Croat majority because these Croats believed in Bosnia, and he abandoned the defense of the city and let them get slaughtered by the Serbs because he said these are self-hating Jews. These are self-hating Croats. The point being is that the reason that the Kurds in the northeast, the separatist Kurds, are negotiating with Damascus is precisely because Trump wants to leave Syria and they're worried they're going to be completely abandoned. The reason why I make this distinction is Ahmed Alsharaa is being very careful not to sell out. The Israelis are trying to say that we're normalizing ties.
Yeah.
Ahmed Alsharaa is saying, I just want a ceasefire. I'm not normalizing. I just want a ceasefire.
So there's been no talk from the
I don't think
Syrian
that
government.
Ahmed Alsharaa, when he talks to the Israelis, is proposing normalization.
Right.
I think Ahmed Alsharaa is talking to the Israelis indirectly and saying to them that, guys, the 1972 ceasefire, I will respect it. I want the pause in the war. The Israelis are saying this, we can market it as normalization. Trump is saying we can market it as normalization. I think Ahmed Alsharaa is saying market it however you want. As far as I'm concerned, this is just a ceasefire that I'm doing it that's based on the terms of the 1972. It's not normalization like the way that the UAE is doing.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily see anything politically wrong with this approach, given the circumstances that Syria finds itself in. And I think as long as Trump is in power, not the Democrats, Trump, I think Ahmed Alsharaa can make a very serious case for complete American withdrawal from Syria, which the Israelis would consider to be a catastrophic disaster because it would allow Ahmed Alsharaa then to establish himself and restore Syria's territorial integrity, and then Erdogan and these others can begin the process of rebuilding Syria.
Sami, I've never really heard from you ever that you're impressed with the maneuverings of one of the Muslim rulers. It seems to me that you are quite impressed with the way Ahmed Alsharaa has bought himself some space here. I mean, is that a fair assessment of your analysis of Syria so far?
I don't think it's a case of being impressed at all.
Yeah.
I played football or soccer because I know you have a big American audience. May Allah forgive them for the wrong terminology. But I played football for I say most of my life like I'm an old man. But
Yeah.
I played football and I played it county level and, you know.
Really?
In any case, yeah. But listen, man, I'm a decent player. But
No
anyway.
way.
So
I would never.
I remember a coach used to say to, we were playing once on the pitch and someone from the substitute bench was like, oh, you should have seen that pass. And the coach said, everyone's a genius on the bench.
Yeah.
Everyone is a genius. It's not that I'm saying I'm impressed. I'm saying I get it. I'm not saying that he's a masterclass in politics. I'm saying I understand it. I understand when you're broken, I can't ask you to go and liberate Palestine. I'm aware of the pains that the Syrians have gone through. I'm aware of the destruction that went through Syria. I went to those refugee camps. I know the stories. I know the disaster. I know the sheer destruction and scale of it that took place in Syria. I know it is objectively impossible for Syria to do anything of value at this moment in time without a process of reconstruction and rebuilding of the country, at least to a standard and level whereby it's able to assert any sovereignty at all. Yeah. And I think Ahmed Alsharaa understands that in the way that when he enters into Damascus, the first thing that he does is issue pardons, amnesty, sends people to allay the fears of the minority communities. In every speech, he tells his own troops, don't violate the prisoners, don't transgress against them, saying to them, don't give an excuse for people to say that we're coming in and taking revenge. I think that reflects that Ahmed Alsharaa is aware that the greatest danger to his rule is the perception that he's coming to bring more destruction. And I think that Syria deserves to be given a chance to dictate its own fate after 10 years of being dictated to by Iran, by Russia, by Qatar, by Turkey, by Saudi, by UAE, by Obama, and then Trump. Not Trump didn't really dictate too much, but by Biden and these places as well. It's not that I'm impressed, it's that I get it. And I think sometimes politics is not about whether you agree with something or not. Politics is the science of possibilities, the science of human nature. You can't say to a cripple, go and fight me a battle and go and win. You say to the cripple, before you can even go out to battle, go and see a doctor, go and get crutches, go and wait for your leg to recover, take this medication, take these pills, when you're ready, then you go out. Yeah. You're asking a guy on crutches to go and do something that no able-bodied person is able to do at this moment in time. That's how I see Syria at this moment.
Yeah, because I mean, from the outside, and I get the point about commenting on the bench, but from the outside, there's a lot of emotion. and a lot of expectations. And your point is you've got to put yourself in a position of Syria, and you've got to understand where Syria is. In a sense, politics is a very unemotional science. Is that what you're basically saying here?
Human beings are created with mind and body, mind and soul, the rational and the emotions. Politics, you can't separate the two. Whenever somebody says, you know, we need to take the emotion out of politics, the whole essence of politics is human nature. It's governed by emotions, whether you like it or not.
Right.
And objective nature is always skewed by your own experiences. It's like, for example, the other day, I think it was with it's with your team, and may Allah forgive them, they got iPhones. And I had Samsung wal Jama'ah. So they had the iPhone there, and I said, two people can look at the iPhone, and I can dislike it, and they can like it. We're both looking at the same thing, but as a result of our experiences, because I had the MacBook at 17, I took it for a repair shop, they charged me a ridiculous price. I said, I'm never buying it again, even though I bought a MacBook recently. But anyway, the point that I'm saying is, you can have different perspectives. It's not about taking the emotion out of it. It's about caring about the people, caring about more than yourself. The Syrians are traumatized. The Syrians just came out of a war, like a brutal war, in which Iran believed it was better to massacre the Syrian people than allow them to have freedom. The Russians believed it was better to bomb them into oblivion than allow them to topple a dictatorial regime that denied them freedom. The Americans believed that Syrians couldn't be trusted to choose their own leaders, so we would prefer to leave Syria paralyzed, where neither Assad is strong and neither the Syrians are able to have their own freedom. The Qataris supported on the basis, they said that we shouldn't let the Syrians choose unless they vote for our allies. The Saudis said we can't trust the Syrians to choose because they might choose Qatar as allies. The Syrians are a traumatized people, and it's not about the case of being unemotional. It's a case of being emotionally intelligent enough to actually care about the Syrians, to actually care about a Syrian who lost 12 family members. Jalal, when I was going across America and Australia, and you know, people would bring up the issue of Iran and unity between the sexes. And I'm not getting involved in that issue at this particular moment in time. I would always have a Syrian after the talk who'd come to me and say to me, Brother Sami, is it a sign of weak iman on my part if I am unable to join the ummah in celebrating the butchers of my family because they fired some missiles onto Israel? Meaning that the lack of emotion towards the plight of the Syrians by the majority of the ummah meant that Syrians went from, how dare you, to please listen to us. And then some Syrians got to the point of, am I the one who has weak iman because I'm unable to cheer the people who gathered my family in Yarmouk and shot the daylights out of them because of a sectarian agenda? Like, that's how bad. And that's what I mean. When you say politics is not about emotion, I'm arguing here it's about emotion. For once, feel for the Syrian people. I'm not saying you specifically. Feel for them and care about them. You want them now to pay a price to go into war. I'm not saying that I agree with what Ahmed Alsharaa is doing. And I'm not saying I disagree. I know it sounds like I'm flirting and dancing with it. I don't need to. I have no responsibility. Allah will not ask me about what Ahmed Alsharaa did. What I'm saying is, if you can show empathy for what the Syrians went through, your analysis will be 1,000,000 times better. If you can understand what the Syrians are experiencing and feeling right now, then you will understand what Ahmed Alsharaa is doing, and you'll understand where he's going, and you will come to the conclusion that, in my opinion, is my conclusion, which is that for all of the talk of Ahmed Alsharaa placating, my question here is this: why aren't the Israelis feeling comfortable with his placating? Why are the Israelis continued concerned? Why aren't the Israelis satisfied with what people are terming the normalization process? Why are the Israelis bombing Suwaida and bombing Damascus and bombing the like, desperately trying to get the Americans to remove Ahmed Alsharaa? Why are the UAE and Israel desperately trying to remove Ahmed Alsharaa, to put a minority president in power, to ensure that majoritarian rule is never conducted in Syria, because they fear a majority ruled Syria, because it will allow a Syria that is built, because they fear that a strong Syria won't be a state that normalizes with Israel. It will be a state that threatens the Israelis. What I don't understand as a political analyst is how the Zionist conclusion is that Ahmed Alsharaa is a danger, but that conclusion that the Zionists have is the opposite of those that you're talking about now, who are looking at Ahmed Alsharaa and saying, no, he's complying with the Israelis. Why are you saying the Israelis are happy when the Israelis are saying that they're not happy? It's a very weird and construed argument.
So what is the Israeli position then towards Syria? I mean, it's never going to tolerate an effective Muslim state on its borders. It probably wants a fragmented Syria. from this point onwards, where do you think the Israelis will go?
Israelis are proposing a plan to split Syria into 4. They want the southern part where Suwayda is to be an autonomous region that belongs to the Druze community with no central government presence, that the Israelis will commit, between quotation marks, to protect it whenever the central government tries to assert itself in Suwayda. They're trying to establish a proxy in Suwayda in the south, and that's the first province that they want to create in which they split Syria. The second province they want to split is the northeast. They want to convince Trump to adopt the Democrat Biden-Obama policy of supporting the separatist Kurds in the northeast, giving them an autonomous region. That's where the oil is. It will make Damascus dependent on them for resources, meaning that Damascus will never have the money to rebuild, never have the money to invest in military, never have the money to rebuild the societies that have been broken, and it will remain economically paralyzed. So the Israelis are campaigning and lobbying on behalf of the separatist Kurds for America to stay in Syria because Trump wants to leave, and for the Americans to establish the Northeast Autonomous Region that belongs to either the SDF or the separatist Kurds. And then the Israelis, as a concession, are considering a northern territory where Turkey can impose its own allies and its own proxy to say to Erdogan, look, we don't want you to push too hard. We'll give you something. You can have the northern part where Idlib is and these areas is there. You can put your own people there, and that will help you to keep this Kurdish autonomous region in check. The UK can keep clashing between yourselves, and that will leave Damascus paralyzed. Ahmed Alsharaa can then stay in Damascus. We don't mind Ahmed Alsharaa there in Damascus, but Ahmed Alsharaa at this point will have no resources and ability to be able to rebuild Syria. The Israeli plan doesn't actually include Ahmed Alsharaa. The Israeli plan goes even further and says, after Syria is divided into 4, we put a minority president in charge of Damascus itself to ensure that Damascus remains a paralyzed central government, the way Baghdad is a paralyzed central government in Iraq, due to the sectarian divisions that are divided up, where the president has to be from a certain sect or certain ethnicity, the prime minister has to be from a certain sect, the head of parliament from a certain sect, and they divide the positions this way, the way Hezbollah in Lebanon or the Lebanese system is divided in the sects. And I think the UAE highlighted the Israeli plan in 2018, whereby Yusuf al-Utayba, I think he was talking to the CSIS or Brookings, I don't know which think tank, when he was asked what's the ideal solution for Syria, he said the ideal solution is one like Lebanon, preventing majority rule because it might bring religious parties to power, and ensuring there is an over-representation of minorities in parliament to ensure that no one has the main power. What the UAE meant was, we want to make sure UAE remains paralyzed. That's the Israeli plan for Syria.
So Israel wants a fragmented, a weak region so that they can dominate that region. And until now, the Americans have sort of coalesced and accepted that type of that understanding. But the Trump administration doesn't see why it needs to be present in Syria, or at least the Trump administration, because of MAGA, because of its sort of base, because of its sort of ideological inclination, regards this American policy in the Middle East to be pretty much based on folly.
There's a very good article that I encourage people to read. I think if you search on Google, James Jeffrey, El Monitor. I think it's with El Monitor. James Jeffrey was the US envoy to Syria. He served under Obama and under Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And James Jeffrey was asked his interview after he left his post, what was it like working for Obama and what was it like working for Trump? And to paraphrase, James Jeffrey essentially said that under Obama, Syria policy was really much in the hands of myself and CENTCOM. And, you know, Obama generally didn't have a clear vision of what should be done in Syria, but he gave it to the bureaucrats. He said under Trump it was different because Trump every single day would ask us, why are we in Syria for? What? He said we used to spend more energy convincing Trump to stay in Syria than we did actually focused on Syria policy.
Yeah.
And he said one of the reasons why is that Trump was always on the phone with Erdogan. And Erdogan would keep telling him, you don't need to be in Syria. I'm a NATO ally. I can look after security in Syria myself. And he said Trump would come back to us and say, Erdogan has offered to look after security in Syria. Why do we need to do it? Why do I need to spend taxpayer money on it? Why do I need to send US troops? It's not a case of US policy changing. It's Trump. Trump is the one who is saying to US officials who have their jaws dropped to the floor, where he's saying to them, I want to leave Syria the way I left Afghanistan. And they're telling him, Mr. President, please, we want to stay in Syria. And Trump is saying, give me a good reason why I should stay in Syria. And Israel and the US officials are struggling to convince Trump to do so. When Israel is saying, okay, let's suppose Trump wants to leave, but let's split it into 4, Trump is turning around, in my opinion, and he's saying to them, If you split it into four, you cause civil war and we're going to have to come back in anyway. So I don't want it to be split into four. I respect, and Marco Rubio came out during the Suwaida issue and said, we stand with the territorial integrity with Syria. I think that's a Trump position, which is, I just want a guy who can keep the peace. I just want a guy who won't give me a reason to intervene. I want a guy who promises to fight ISIS at his own expense. I want a guy who promises to ensure there's no threat to American interests. I want a guy who can make sure I don't need to focus on the Middle East, so I can focus on China, on tariffs, and these other issues as well. And Ahmed Alsharaa is saying, I'm that guy, and the Israelis are failing to convince Trump that Ahmed Alsharaa is not that guy.
Turkey's position in this entire crisis, and actually its position with regards to the so-called Rojava state that the Israelis may want to create, the SDF Kurdish faction in the northeast, prospects for some sort of reconciliation. I know there have been talks ongoing between the central government and the Kurds in the northeast. Just explain sort of the Turkish dimension here.
In 2013, Recep Tayyip Erdogan announced a unilateral peace process with the PKK. When I say unilateral, he invited them to the peace talk. He announced it and said, guys, I want to talk. And the reason being is that in 2013, Turkey's economy was flying. The Arab Spring had just taken place. There was a sense that Erdogan is now in power. 2008, he'd done the constitutional changes that restored the right of hijab at state institutions. In 2008, he amended the constitution to recognize the Kurdish language and allow it to be manifested, and Kurdish culture to be manifested as well, after the Ataturk legacy had tried to crush it and suppress it. And Ataturk's legacy had actually led to the emergence of these separatist groups and the like. Erdogan, through the Muslim rhetoric, had managed to win over swathes of the Kurdish population who were actually voting AK Party, not because Erdogan was a Turk, but because Erdogan was Muslim. And Erdogan capitalized on that capital in 2013 to say, I want to start a peace process. There's no reason left for the PKK to stand. I have brought a reconciliation between the Kurds and the like. And the PKK, realizing they were rapidly losing Kurdish support. I was in Van, I was in Diyarbakir, I was in Bingöl, I was in these other cities as well that are Kurdish cities. I went to these places in 2008 and I went to them again in 2011 and in 2012. The overwhelming sentiment was that Erdogan is different from those who came before him. Why? Erdogan Muslim. And therefore they found the space within the vision that Erdogan was creating for them. And the PKK were even resorting to kidnapping members of Kurdish families to try to strike fear in the hearts of the Kurdish community, to tell them stop gravitating towards Erdogan. When the PKK realized they were losing the Kurdish communities in eastern Turkey, they decided they really had no choice. And given that Syria, Syria, they saw no hope for establishing an independent state in Syria, they engaged with the process. When they got to the clause of disarming completely, Syria began to cascade into a civil war. The PKK, when they saw what was happening in Syria, they said, wait a minute. Maybe what happens in Syria is going to create an opportunity for us to make a new bid to establish an autonomous region in Syria, and from there we can use it as a launch pad. Erdogan realized what the PKK were doing and began to get frustrated. So the PKK started to stall in the negotiations because of the renewed hope that maybe they can establish an independent state. Erdogan then resorted to bombing PKK areas, eventually alienating much of the population in amongst the Kurds, who would later gravitate towards the HDP when they felt, or the HDP, on the basis they thought that Erdogan had betrayed their trust, and the HDP became a force to be reckoned with later on. In any case, Erdogan is trying to revive the situation today because he believes now, as a result of what happened in Syria, and with Trump withdrawing from Syria, the PKK have no breathing space. Like, they're starting to run out of breathing space. Öcalan recognizes this, the head of the PKK. So Öcalan says, in order to preserve ourselves and what we have, if the Americans leave, we'll get slaughtered. If the Americans leave, we, the separatist Kurds, are done for. Like, we'll be at Erdogan's mercy. So let's quickly start a peace process with Erdogan in order to preserve what we have. Erdogan is willing, because Erdogan wants that as part of the jewel of his crown, that I brought peace between the Kurdish populations and the Turkish populations, and I did it because I am Erdogan. The concern for Turkey at the moment is that the separatist Kurds are carefully observing what's happening in Suwaida. If Suwaida becomes autonomous, then the separatist Kurds are likely to ask the Israelis to help them secure something similar in northeast Turkey. The concern for Turkey is that before Suwaida, there was a rush to come to an agreement between the separatist Kurds rushed to agree with Damascus on a broader framework of reintegration. But if the Americans indicate that they're willing to do a Suwaida-esque support in northeastern Syria, then the PKK no longer have an incentive to put down their arms and continue this negotiation with Erdogan. The peace talks completely collapse. Not only will they collapse, but that autonomous region established in Syria will be an American-defended autonomous region and Israeli-defended, meaning the PKK will have a branch that is protected internationally to then continue to harass Turkey in the way that they've been doing over the past years. And that's why Suwaida is so dangerous for the Turks. The Turks believe they can wrap up the Kurdish issue and establish themselves in Syria as it stands, but that the Israeli and Suwaida operation could ruin that for them entirely. And that's why I think Erdogan is on the phone with Marco Rubio, Hakan Fidan is on the phone with Marco Rubio, Erdogan is on the phone with Donald Trump to say to him, Ahmed Alsharaa is your guy. Don't let the Israelis have their way in Suwaida. We can look after security in Syria. And it remains to be seen who will win in this debate with Donald Trump. At the moment, it appears Erdogan has more sway. We remember Netanyahu went to the White House to ask for help against Turkey in Syria. And Donald Trump said, listen, if you go up against Erdogan, Erdogan's my friend. I can't guarantee that I'm going to help you. Israel is trying to lobby the Americans against the Turkish interests, but it feels like Trump is closer to Erdogan in his thinking on Syria than he is towards the Israelis.
How committed is Turkey to Syria?
Erdogan, I think, in my opinion, dreams of a sultan-esque state. And what's interesting is that often you'll find, even amongst Turkish nationalists, there is a view that large parts of Syria, in their opinion, belongs to Turkey. Large parts of Iraq belong to Turkey. There was an agreement signed between Turkey and Syria that used to allow the Turkish regime to, without asking permission from Damascus, to march in within 30, 40 kilometers. And it was a sign of the Turks saying that this is our territory anyway, so we're allowed to march in as we wish. Erdogan believes that historically the road to power goes through Syria, then goes through Egypt, and that's the historical Ottoman areas. I'm not falling into the trope of neo-Ottoman, but Erdogan, when you look at his rhetoric, when you look at what he did with Hagia Sophia, when you look at the masajid that he built, the shows that he commissioned, Ertugrul, Alp Arslan, you know, the Fatih Sultan Mehmed shows and these others, it's clear that in Erdogan's socio-historical memory, his vision for what Turkey looks like is a Muslim Turkey that restores its influence over those areas that it used to rule in the Muslim world itself. And that's why I think Erdogan is so invested in Turkey and very keen to be the pioneer of rebuilding Syria in the shape of what it looked like when the Ottomans were there. And I don't think Syrians are necessarily averse to it, primarily because one of the reasons that Erdogan took in the Syrians in Turkey was primarily to normalize the idea of an identity that is greater than the Turkish identity. You remember Erdogan used to say that the Syrians are not refugees, they are guests here. Albeit later on when he suffered politically and economically, he would later alter his rhetoric to more nationalist. But the indication during good times, where he would refer to them as guests, indicated that Erdogan, the way he sees his golden age, is an age in which the Turkish identity goes beyond just the ethnic Turks. That's Erdogan's vision. And I think that when it comes to Syria, he sees Syria as part of the Turkish or Ottoman-esque sphere of influence, which is what allows him to connect very well with the Muslim-esque parties that are in Syria today. How he navigates that with the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and the UAE, who are averse to the Muslim identity in Syria to the extent that Saudis would elevate minority Christian groups as leaders of the opposition in order to prevent any Sunni leader of the opposition, despite them being Sunni states. You'll remember that Saudi had no problem with Bashar in power, but they did have a problem with Alawi Bashar in power. They had no problem with that. They even were happy to reconcile with that. UAE had no problem with Alawi Bashar in power, with Shia Bashar in power. But they did have a problem with the prospect of a Sunni Ikhwan in power. They didn't have a problem with a Alawi Bashar in power, but they did have a problem with the prospect of a Sunni Ahmed Alsharaa in power. The irony is that the Saudi and the UAE are actually more comfortable with a Shia in power in Damascus, or with a Christian in power in Damascus, or with a Druze in power in Damascus, than they are with somebody from the Sunni majority in Syria itself. That's the irony of what's taking place in Syria itself. Erdogan wants that Sunni majoritarianism in Damascus. And I'm not speaking about in the sense that one sect is better than the other. I'm not saying in that regard. I'm saying that there is a concerted effort by those who want to separate Syria, to split Syria, to ensure that the majorities are not represented in government, but that the majority is crippled by the minorities, instead of allowing the majority to create an environment where minorities can thrive as well. That's where I think it's interesting to see where Turkey will navigate those sensitivities from the UAE and Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, so let's talk about the UAE position. I mean, the UAE is, of course, one of the closest states to Israel in the Middle East, and the UAE has played a horrid role in the Middle East over the last 10 years. I mean, explain the UAE position towards Syria and the current crisis.
The UAE is torn between celebrating Iran's loss in Syria and between the prospect of the Arab populations seeing Ahmed Alsharaa as a model to be replicated in their own countries. The UAE is uncertain which is worse: Iran in power in Syria, or Ahmed Alsharaa, who might inspire movements that will topple Sisi in Egypt, King Abdullah in Jordan, bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, and sort of that fear of a renewed Arab Spring that might take place in the region itself. As a result of this uncertainty, the UAE is entertaining the prospect of what Ahmed Alsharaa has to propose, while mulling over which direction they should go in terms of who they should support in Syria. So it's unclear if the UAE is on Hikmat al-Hijri's side in Suwaidah, or if they're on the side of Ahmed Alsharaa.
Really?
It's unclear if they support the Israeli plan to split Syria, or if they're aligning with Trump to keep Syria united under Ahmed Alsharaa. I think the UAE is in a phase of, let's see what happens first. UAE does not buy Ahmed Alsharaa's argument in any way whatsoever that he will somehow be some sort of ally for the UAE. But the UAE is encouraged that Abdurrahman al-Qardawi was delivered to the UAE so he could be put in the UAE prisons and disappeared.
Explain that. Who delivered him?
Abdurrahman al-Qardawi is the son of the late Sheikh Yusuf al-Qardawi, Allah yarham. When Syria was liberated from Bashar al-Assad, Abdurrahman al-Qardawi went to the Umayyad Masjid, the Umayyad Masjid, and he's known as a poet, and sometimes like very explicit poetry, particularly on Muslim dictators. So when he went to the masjid, he recorded a video where he recited some poetry, and he also said, Syria is free, and I know those in Saudi Arabia and UAE are not happy about this freedom. Nothing happened to him in Syria, but when he crossed the border into Lebanon, he was immediately kidnapped. He's a Turkish and Egyptian citizen. So under international law, if he's arrested and deported, he should be deported to either Egypt or either Turkey. Lebanon, the government there, decided to deport him to the UAE at the request of the UAE. Requested Lebanon to deport him to them so that they could punish him for the stuff that he said about the UAE. And the Lebanese government complied. They deported him to the UAE. The Syrian government did not issue any statement or protest about Abdurrahman Qardawi. It was sort of an indication to the UAE, we don't want to provoke the UAE here. The Turks didn't issue any statement about him either, despite the fact he's a Turkish citizen. The Turks would later say, listen, we said that the Turkish citizenship does not protect you from the UAE because we need their $50 billion trade deal. We need their money, so just so you're aware, if you go to an Arab state, we can't protect you there because we don't want to jeopardize our relations for them, and you're not worth jeopardizing the relationship for, even if you have a Turkish citizenship. And that was from Turkey to say to the UAE, we don't want to offend the UAE either. So the UAE is encouraged by Syria's refusal or omission of taking these sorts of positions. When one of Ahmed Alsharaa's close allies during the fight against Bashar al-Assad did a video saying Sisi is next, Ahmed Alsharaa put him under house arrest. Okay, house arrest between quotation marks. They say he's being put in a nice area, and that rather it was to say to Sisi that, look, we won't allow anybody to conspire against you over here. And they put him in a nice place to say, Habibi, look, like, we need these guys. Like, we need UAE, we need like Saudi Arabia. Now is not that time to make this statement. And I think he responded to Ahmed Alsharaa and said, I get it. I got you. I understand. Like, I won't make a statement like that again. I understand the situation that you're in. we'll think about it for a later time. The UAE is encouraged by that. But it's unclear if they really want to see Ahmed Alsharaa strong, or rather they want to do a wait and see. And the reason I say is because this is the point I finish on. The promise of money has not materialized into actual money. So he's visiting them and they're promising to support him. But Saudi has yet to send those oil ships that it has promised. Aside from paying, you know, by their standards, a paltry 15 million to pay off the debt, Saudi hasn't really invested in Syria yet. Despite the lifting of sanctions, there's not a rush of money suddenly into Syria from the Gulf states either. So I think the UAE is on a wait-and-see approach.
Earlier on, we had this conversation about Ahmed Alsharaa and his requirement or his sort of strategy of creating a space for himself because his country is in a very impoverished and tattered situation because
Ahmed
of war.
Alsharaa and the Syrians.
And the Syrians,
and
right.
like Syrians are also asking for this
Are they
space.
on board? That's the question. I mean, because of course, earlier on, previous episodes, we've talked about the Tunisia situation. We've talked about Egypt. And in all of these situations, we found that Muslim governments came into power, but they lost their people. And as a result of losing their people, they did not have that buffer between themselves and the wrath of these Gulf states and the Americans and whoever were trying, the Israelis and others who were trying to remove them. Do you feel that Ahmed Alsharaa and the concessions, and I put that in inverted commas, that he has made, do you think that Ahmed Alsharaa has got and continues to have support from Syrians?
I don't think that Ahmed Alsharaa can be compared to Morsi or Ghannouchi in Egypt and Tunisia respectively.
Right.
I think Ahmed Alsharaa is closer to the Taliban in terms of how he came to power than those. Morsi and Ghannouchi, they came via elections, but the power was never truly in their hands. Tunisia maybe in the first couple of years and the like, in which it was squandered. But Morsi was always having to negotiate with an army and with a deep state. Ahmed Alsharaa has no deep state he needs to negotiate with. He took over the country militarily.
Yeah.
He took it by military effort. The deep state is entirely collapsed. Ahmed Alsharaa and his army are literally the state. The entire army has been reformed. All of the factions that fought have formed a new army. Ahmed Alsharaa doesn't have the challenges that Egypt and Tunisia have. Ahmed Alsharaa is closer to the Taliban, who also took over Kabul militarily, and their army became the army. So Ahmed Alsharaa has an advantage that the other two did not have. Because it also means, and he also came on what Syrians believe to be the road to liberation. In the Arab Spring, it was more the people did the revolution, and now we're going to vote for a party that wasn't entirely, part of the revolution, but we're going to trust you with it. Ahmed Alsharaa was the road of liberation for the Syrians. He's seen as synonymous with it in the way that he was in Idlib and these other groups and they came in. So the military legitimacy that Ahmed Alsharaa has is a very unique legitimacy that allows him to establish a council and enjoy the patience of the Syrians in a way that the Egyptians and the Tunisians did not enjoy. What I mean here, to put it very simply, is in Tunisia, the Tunisians said to Ghannouchi, to Rashid Ghannouchi, may Allah, inshallah, release him from prison. He's being unjustly imprisoned by the dictator Qais Said.
Yeah.
The Tunisians said to Ghannouchi, we did this revolution and brought you home, now deliver. The Egyptians said to Morsi, we did this, we the ones who did it, now go and deliver. In Syria, Ahmed Alsharaa brought that, alongside the Syrian people. Like he's not the one being tasked with it. He marched and he took it and he delivered with it. And that sort of legitimacy is a huge advantage for Ahmed Alsharaa, which is why I don't tend to compare him to Tunisia and Egypt, because I think it's a false comparison.
Yeah.
I compare him to the Taliban, who are looking for international recognition, who are looking for finances, who are looking for economic development, but who have established a new political system in the way Ahmed Alsharaa is now establishing based on their own terms, and that allows them to get away with the economic deterioration that we're seeing because people recognize they're in a rebuilding phase.
For the last 2 years, we've been talking about Gaza and the horrible situation in Gaza, and this conversation about Syria. Of course, some people superficially put high expectations on this new Syria and say this new Syria should be marching into Tel Aviv, or should be marching into Gaza or the like. And we know that just practically cannot happen, and that's an impossible task for this state. But I'm minded to note that you have criticized all Muslim governments around the world for not acting enough in Gaza, whether that's diplomatically or economically. So states as far afield as Malaysia, where we are at the moment, or Pakistan, or these states and governments that could have done more, as well as the Gulf states. I mean, from my conversation with you today, there's a recognition that there are two types of states, really. There are those states who do have ability. They do have some level of political autonomy. They do have some economic cushion to be able to challenge this status quo. And then you've got poorer states, or you've got fringe states. You've got Pakistan, for example. And can you really compare what Saudi Arabia can do? Saudi Arabia can put a stop to this genocide, but refuses to do so. And Pakistan, yes, it's a nuclear state, but economically impoverished, doesn't really have that level of ability, is not in close proximity to the region. Like, is it fair, in other words, to blame all of the Muslim rulers for the failure of Gaza? Or should we cut some slack for some of these rulers and actually go after the UAEs and the Saudis and the Turks, quite frankly, for not doing enough?
The simple answer is, I disagree with the assessment. You use Pakistan, for example. Pakistan's problem is not that it is economically impoverished. Pakistan's problem is that it is colonized by a military elite that prefer to see an impoverished Pakistan to a free and prosperous Pakistan.
Yeah.
Putting Imran Khan in prison just because he might win an election demonstrates that the military elite would rather see Pakistan burn than allow the Pakistani people to choose who their leaders should be. So Pakistan's issue is not that it lacks power. It has power as a nuclear power.
Yeah.
It has power diplomatically, but that power is leveraged against the Pakistani people, not for the Pakistani people. Likewise, in Saudi Arabia, the power that can be deployed in order to end the genocide in Gaza, that power is deployed against the Saudi people. It's not deployed for the Saudi people, not even for Palestine and for Gaza. The Syria example is not that I'm making excuses for Ahmed Alsharaa. It's that it's the reality of the situation, because the manifestation of using power against the people results in the collapse of a state like Syria. Syria, it's not that I'm giving it a pass. Syria is what will happen if the Muslim nations continue to prioritize the national interest over the Ummah's interest. Syria is what will happen to these other states. The fragmentation, the people rising up for justice, the subsequent foreign intervention, and the collapse. I'm not giving Syria a free pass. I'm saying it doesn't exist. I'm saying it doesn't exist even in the equation for us to determine whether it can even have any power or role to play whatsoever. The Israeli planes flew over Syria because the state does not exist. And the reason it does not exist is because there was a regime called the Assad regime, backed by the Iranians and the Russians, that deployed the power that they could have used for Palestine. They deployed that power instead against the Syrian people, and they sparked such devastation and destruction that Syria is now out of the equation. When we criticize the Muslim rulers, the reason why you criticize the Muslim rulers is because, and I give this example, if we're talking mathematics, X equals Y, are the Americans doing anything strange in their support for the Israelis that we haven't seen before? No. Are they doing anything different from what you expected in this genocide in Gaza in the way they're supporting the Israelis? Nothing. Americans have been imperial power. They've been so since they became a superpower.
Yeah.
Are the Europeans doing anything differently? Absolutely not. So the X side of the equation is the same as it has always been since Israel was established and before. So what is broken in the equation that allowed an unprecedented genocide to take place with Palestine? We've had genocides, things, but not on this scale. What is broken in the equation? It's the Y side. Who's the Y side? The Y side is the Muslim rulers. In 73, the Y side was balanced, the oil embargo. 2001, you had the Crown Prince Abdullah bin Abdulaziz when he withdrew the ambassador from Washington, recalled him, and when he threatened to cut ties with Bush. The balance was there. The Y side is broken. It's not broken because Muslim leaders lost power. It's broken because the Muslim leaders don't want the Y. They've made it 1 over Y. Why 1 over Y? They've made it flipped because today it's not that Muslim leaders are neutral. They're complicit. The Saudi Crown Prince agrees with Israel's aims to eliminate Hamas. UAE agrees with Israel's aims to eliminate Hamas. Their only contention is do it in a cleaner way. Erdogan believes that Syria is a priority and I don't want to harm my relations with the Israelis. And therefore, my people think they want to stand for Gaza, but I'm going to make sure no flotilla leaves Istanbul. I don't want to offend them. I've got an economic crisis. Send Ben Yok, Turkey var. Malaysia, Anwar Ibrahim says, I'm caught between America and China. So I need to appease the people who are talking about Gaza. I believe Anwar cares about Gaza. But if I'm going to make a statement about Gaza, I need to buy Boeing jets as well. If I'm going to lambast the Americans about Gaza, I need to smile with Anthony Blinken and I need to promise to buy semiconductors as well because I want American investments here. If I'm going to go to the Bogota summit, in which I'm going to announce measures against the Israelis, I need to offer BlackRock also, you know, the airport and the management of the airport, because I want to show the Americans that there are limits to what I'm willing to do with regards to Palestine and beyond. Muslim countries collectively have the ability to make a difference. But the Muslim governments have aimed their resources against their own people. Turkey, not so much, but certainly the other Muslim states, including the Qataris. They've aimed their resources against their own people. And that's why I argue that the reason the Muslim leaders need to be criticized is because many of them are the front line of defense of Zionism. When that Sumud convoy left Algeria and Tunisia, it wasn't stopped on the border with Israel, or so-called Israel. I don't recognize it as a state. It wasn't stopped in Rafah. It was stopped in Sirte in Libya. It was stopped in Cairo in Egypt. The land bridge that goes from the UAE all the way to Israel goes through Jordan. It goes through Saudi Arabia. El Al, when it flies to Dubai, where the flights still continue, anyone can open Flight Radar and see it, it flies through Saudi airspace. Saudis have not stopped the flights going through Saudi airspace. Saudis and the Qataris and the UAE have not withdrawn the billions of dollars that they gave to Jared Kushner, who said openly, I'm investing this stuff in the Israelis. Like, none of that has changed. These are the first line of defense for the Zionist regimes. First line of defense against who? Against the people. And that's why I argue that when you're given categories or tiers, Pakistan or Saudi Arabia or these things, can you imagine if Pakistan, the military elite, lifted their chokehold that they have on the Pakistani people, allowed free elections, allowed the Pakistanis to choose, allowed them to dream of a free Pakistan. And because it became free, those Pakistanis in America, the ones who make millions of dollars and who are experts in tech, decide to go back because it's free, because they're now allowed to innovate. And so the production of the latest tech happens in Pakistan. The latest military hardware is produced in Pakistan. That talent that's being used in MIT, that's being used in Boeing, that's being used in Lockheed Martin, they leave because they want to serve Pakistan, because they know it's free, because they know that there is justice there. They go and rebuild. Pakistan won't just be a nuclear power, it will be a military power. And that's why Ibn Khaldun says, الظُّلْمُ مُؤْذِنٌ بِخَرَابِ الْعُمْرَانِ. Oppression destroys civilization. Oppression drives talent to leave the country. Oppression reduces market size. Oppression makes less taxes, less revenue. Oppression destroys it. And the reason the military elite in Pakistan don't feel it is because they live comfortably while the rest of the people are poor. It's a Marie Antoinette syndrome, where the French Revolution emerged, but Marie Antoinette could not understand why the French were revolting against them, because they lived in lovely compounds while the French lived in miserable conditions. Pakistan needs to be liberated. The Muslim world needs to be liberated. Not from Zionism first, but from the allies of Zionism, who believe that it is better to bring Israel to bomb Damascus than it is to allow Ahmed Alsharaa to assert himself in Suwaida, who believe that it's better to bring the mercenaries into our countries and our lands to fight against our own people instead of relying on our people to protect them against the Americans, who believe it's better to bring NATO to bomb Libya than it is to go and get the Libyans to support them against Gaddafi instead, who believe it's better to bring NATO against Iraq than it is to find some sort of accord with Iraq and with the accorded people, who believe it's better to set up an Al-Udaid base to point at Saudi Arabia than it is to find an accord with Saudi Arabia, who believe it's better to bring military bases in Saudi Arabia to point towards Qatar and Iran than it is to find an accord with Iran, who believe that it's better to bring the foreign power and the Zionists against my brother because I would rather ally with the genocidal rabid army than I would with my own brother. That's the disaster with the Muslim world. It's not, I want the equation to be fixed. I want the X and the Y to be balanced, because the X is the same as it's always been. It's the Y that is broken. And if bin Salman tomorrow picks up the phone and calls Erdogan and calls the rest of the Muslim leaders and tells them we're all withdrawing our ambassadors from Washington because we're making a stance on Gaza and we're putting on hold the $3.4 trillion that we're giving to the Americans, we're going to give it to South Africa instead because they took the case to the ICJ, I think Trump will come running and say to the Saudis, listen, it doesn't need to be this way. Netanyahu, do a ceasefire now. But he chooses not to do so. Why? Not because they are scared, but because they are complicit. They don't mind the Palestinians getting slaughtered because they are benefiting from those who are supporting the genocide. And bin Salman and bin Zayed want to see the Palestinians destroyed, want to see the Palestinian bloc eradicated, because in their view, the future of the Ummah doesn't look like the Ummah of the past. It looks like Miami, it looks like Jennifer Lopez, it looks like Nicki Minaj, it looks like casinos, it looks like breweries, it looks like introduction of alcohol again, it looks like bikini beaches, it looks like parties in Al-Ula. That's what the future looks like, and Palestine does not fit in that future.
Sami Hamdi, Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much for your time today.
Jazakallah khair.
Please remember to subscribe to our social media and YouTube channels, and head over to our website thinkingmuslim.com to sign up to my weekly newsletter. Jazakallah khair.